Anyway, back to Wilson Caldwell and the Glenwood Baptist Church. They came in and helped us in our vacation Bible school, both in Wounded Knee and at Pine Ridge that first year. One of the unique things was that they, I started to talk about it. They got some kind of a brochure on some kind of a camp area out by Porcupine that was a native, owned by Native Americans, and was kind of a they even had a brochure that showed Johnny Cash riding a horse on their place, and so Wilson got excited about this, and before I had a chance to do anything about it, he got made reservations out there for their group to stay, and I told Wilson when I found out about it, I said, man, we did an Indian youth camp out there one time about 3 years ago, and I said, man, the facilities are not near what they're telling you they are. And I told him, I said, we need to make different arrangements. And no, this will work. And so we went out. I went out and met him out there when they got there, and it was exactly like I had said. They had their meal that night was cheese, macaroni and cheese was their whole meal, and they fed about 35, 40 people. And the cabins that they had were there was access to where snakes could get in, and there was a group of people around that were very easily on the shady side, and so Wilson decided that that this was not where he wanted his people to stay, and we made arrangements for part of them to stay, part of his group to stay in our church, and part of them, and now we're talking about that little house that had been worked on, and some of them to stay in the doctor's homes, and some of them in ours, and this was where they stayed this first year that they were there. Later, we were able to work out to where they could stay in the girls' dormitory out at the school, out at OCS, because the school was shut down in the summertime, and which made good facilities. But this was one of the early groups, and along in those early times was the shower systems. The first shower system that we used was a pallet. You know what a pallet is? A wood. Okay, we set a pallet out in our backyard, and we took 4 sheets of plywood, 4x8 sheets of plywood, and set them up in the air, and put a hinge on one of them to where it would pull out. We took a garden hose and put a sprinkler on it, and it was cold water. And this was the shower for some of those early groups.
I can't see any group doing that today.
Then I don't remember whether it was Glenwood or whether it was one of the groups for. I'll bet you it was Mount Juliet later down, but they built a collapsible 4x8 shower stalls that come up off of the ground about 18 inches, and then there was 5 foot or 6 foot that came up above it and around. I guess it was probably a 10 by 4, and we had a water system hooked up to where out of our church building, when we got our church building built, to where they had hot water out of our church. But you came out the side door into this shower stall, and of course there was only 2 problems to this shower stall. One was there was 18 inches, but between the ground and the bottom of the shower stall. You had to set a guard out so that you didn't have little kids looking up underneath the shower stalls, or up on top of the roof looking down. There was those were the early days of our vacation Bible school groups. But these groups came. It was not the most convenient setup, but they came for one purpose, and that was to share the gospel with our kids, with our people. And so Wilson Caldwell came. His was one of those first early groups that came with us. And the first year they came, we had 43 kids out at Wounded Knee, and we had 156 in Pine Ridge. And it was along this time that we had the big Rapid City flood. Barbara had a friend out of Haber, Montana. That was a boyfriend of hers. Carl came down, and Carl and Barbara and Fred and one of the girls there in Pine Ridge went to Rapid City on Saturday night or Friday night for a double date. Went up to a movie at a drive-in, and were in Rapid City the night of the flood. They were there. It rained, and of course didn't do much for the movie. They were going to go downtown, and they noticed that all the lights were out, and it was raining really heavy, and all of the lights were out. They was not aware of what was going on. The water running everywhere, and so they decided to come on back, and came through through Hermosa, and they had water 18 inches deep running across the road that they drove through coming home, and got on in, and we did not wait up on them. Of course, we were awake. We knew they got in, and didn't know anything had happened till the next morning. About 7:30, 8 o'clock, my mother called from Kansas, and she said, "Are you guys okay?" And I said, what okay? And she said, "Well, I figured you guys might be up in the Black Hills camping out. There was a flood in Rapid City." And so we went down, woke Barbara up, and they didn't know that, other than the fact there was a lot of rain. And so we there was, I forget 200 and some odd people that were killed in that flood, and we were involved in it. It's always been my policy to, when there's a disaster like this, to stay as far away from it as I could, not get involved in it because of the thrill seekers that are around and everything, but the plea came out for people to help, especially doctors and clergy and people that could be of benefit. So Dr. Johnson was the doctor there in Pine Ridge. Dr. Johnson and Fred and I loaded up and went up, and we went totally self-contained. We took my four-wheel drive Scout, and we took all of our food and water and everything we needed, and medical stuff and went up and went to the mayor's office and offered our services, and Ernie was involved in going out to a place about I guess 15 miles east of or west of Rapid City, where there was a person having a heart attack across a river, and so he had to go by boat across this creek and up to care for this person. And Mayor LaCroix at the time was asking for people to, especially for ministers, to help those who had lost loved ones, and they were finding bodies everywhere and no identification on them, and so when he found out that I was from Pine Ridge and worked with Indian people, he asked me to go to the mortuary, and what the mortuary was they were just bodies laid out in the breezeway of the funeral home there, in their parking area, and they were just laid out there, and he asked me to work with Indian people in trying to help them to identify their loved ones, and that was a hard time of going with these folks, and the bodies had just been brought in and washed off, and they were in all different, however they were when they died was the way they were, and we spent 2 days in Rapid City after that flood, in trying to minister to the people that were there, and so we were involved in this ministry. It just seemed like the Lord just he opened doors, just one right after another, and we're going to see this all the way through our ministry. The Lord just seemed to when a situation arose, we were able to be there and to meet needs. Right along this same time, we were in the process of getting ready to build a new church building. It was in late 73 or 74 that our Sioux Baptist Chapel constituted into the Lakota Baptist Church. and we were had been in this little building, and I had listened to people, and they would say, "When are you Baptists going to leave?" And I said, "We're not going to leave." They said, "Well, you don't have a church." And I said, "Well, we've got that. Here's our church." And they said, "How long does it take to take a steeple down off of a house and to move a sign out? You Baptists are not going to stay." And so I began to talk to our church, and I said, "We're going to have to make plans to build a church." And I remember Dr. Johnson's wife. She said, I kept talking about we're going to have to build, and so I sent to the Sunday school board, and I got some building plans, and I began to talk about this, and Ernie's wife, Dr. Johnson's wife, she said, "Preacher said, you're going to get us in debt?" And I said, "No." I said, we're not going to build, but we've got to have a plan so that if anybody says, "What can we do to help? What do we need?" that we'll be able to say, "This is where we're going with this." And several things happened right in there that just over that next year or so that just really were meaningful. For instance, we had a chance to buy an old house just north of our home, of where we eventually moved after we got out of the basement of the building that became our church, and we had a chance to buy that. And it seems like we had paid $500 for that old house. And I had talked with tribal leadership and with people, and if we bought that house, then that would give us, we could lease the property and build a church on it. So we bought that house and tore it down and began to make plans to build to build a church. And I remember Helen Johnson just again and again and again, she said, "Preacher, you're going to get us in debt." And I said, what we need to do is just to trust the Lord and to depend on Him. And during that time that the Lord was bringing people in, the doctors and them and the school teacher, another person came, and that was Ann, who became Ann Path. Ann came in. She was had looking for a teaching job. She was an athletic. I'm trying to think of the term. Anyway, she taught kids exercises and this type of stuff on an elementary level in school, recreation, that type of thing. But that's what she was trained for. But she couldn't find a job in Tennessee where she had gone to school. But she got a job as in charge of the girls' dormitory at Pine Ridge, and came in just cold turkey into Pine Ridge. It's funny, when she first came up, she came up across Nebraska, and she had a real fancy sports car. And she got stuck in a blizzard and never got out of the situation. The first thing she did when she got to Pine Ridge was she bought a little red Jeep, and she was all over the res. Well, her name was Ann Farrell at the time. She later became Ann Taft, and we'll share a little more of that as we get further on. But anyway, Ann came into our church, and we were talking about building, and she said, well, Harold, she said, my dad is on a missions committee in his church in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm going to talk to him. What would it cost for the logs and what we need? And so we already had the plans, see, and we determined that $5,000 would buy the logs, and we had a place in up north of Sturgis that provided logs, and Ann's home church gave $5,000 to buy those logs, and we moved those logs down to Pine Ridge, and there was the beginning of our our church. And we in June of 1975, we began to put down the foundation for our church building. And the Lord, here again, the Lord worked. There was a construction company that was building homes on the res there in Pine Ridge, and one of the guys had a front end loader on his on a big tractor, and he let us use this in leveling out our ground, and then we dug the foundation by hand, and got the foundation dug, and groups came in, and we got the foundation run, and began to lay the logs, and there was street construction going on, and we used some of their machinery that was available, and the Lord just brought it all together to where we either had the manpower or the volunteer labor or whatever it took. One of the things with these logs was that it took longer than what we thought before we were able to get started building, and these logs began to twist